Hello, this is John Majori with MajoriOnBowie.com. And this is the Majori on Bowie YouTube channel, where I post a new interview every week that has something to do with David Bowie. And for daily content, visit the blog, www.majorionbowie.com, where I post new content every single day that almost always has something to do with David Bowie. And today I'm joined by a very special guest that I'm really excited to be talking to, Simon Goddard. Simon is a British author and music journalist, widely regarded as one of the most insightful voices on David Bowie's legacy. He's also written acclaimed books on the Smiths, the Rolling Stones, Elvis Presley, amongst other works. But since 2020, he's been releasing the Bowie Odyssey series, which you could see behind me, a project that chronicles Bowie's life and art against the cultural and social backdrop of the 1970s, with each volume devoted to a single year. This series has earned significant praise, including Sunday Times Music Book of the Year honors for the 70 and 74 volumes, along with Mojo Book of the Year recognition for Bowie Odyssey 73. And the latest volume, surprisingly enough, is Bowie Odyssey 75, with future volumes planned. For Bowie fans who could no longer anticipate a new Bowie album, we now have something to look forward to every year, a new volume of Bowie Odyssey, echoing a time when Bowie himself was releasing music at a remarkable pace, sometimes more than one album per year. Simon also wrote Ziggyology, A Brief History of Ziggy Stardust, which provides a detailed exploration of Bowie's most iconic character. So Simon, thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks.
So let me start with this. The Bowie Odyssey series is a massive undertaking, one book a year. Did you consciously decide that this isn't just going to be something that you do, but it's going to define what you do?
Define what I do. Well, it probably will become, depending on how long I live and how long I write, the thing that I'm sort of now most known for, or possibly will be most known for. I mean, to do if the plan is to do 10 books. The idea. The big important thing I think to mention up front is that it's not the series actually wasn't my idea. It was the publisher's idea. I'd done a book with them. As you said in the introduction, I've written a lot of books before on various subjects, and I was with a new publisher, Omnibus, and I wrote a book about Elvis for them in 2018 called The Comeback. And then about a year later, and I had no new book ideas at all. I had got an email from the my editor there, my boss, and it was quite a strange email. It just said it was along the lines of, "We're thinking of doing 10 books about Bowie in the 70s, one book on each year." And I can't remember exact wording, but the way it was written was like, "What do you think?" And I thought, are they asking me, do I think this is a good idea? Or are they asking me, or do they want 10 books by 10 different writers on 10 different years? I couldn't quite work it out. And I thought, surely they're not asking me to do 10 books, all 10. It should be, I thought that, that's quite, that would be, oh yeah, only a mad person would take that on. So then I kind of, but I asked my agent, I said, have you seen this email? I said, they don't seriously want me or somebody to do all 10 books. And he went, yeah, they do. And then my initial gut reaction was no, because mainly because when you write a book and whatever subject it is, after as you get to the end of writing it, you're pretty much done with it. You pretty much don't want to write about that subject ever again. You can get a bit exhausted. It can be very sort of like Groundhog Day, and because you put all your intensity into it. The thought of doing that for 10 years, which I'm now doing, I thought, oh God, that must be. I thought that'd be just be sort of like creative hell, writing about the same thing again and again. But then I kind of thought about it, and I thought, well, first of all, Bowie, he famously was never the same in every year of the 70s. He changed so much. And then I thought, and the 70s changed so much. And, there's, culturally, the 70s moved so fast, not even if you remove what Bowie's doing. I mean, you go from maybe, you know, from 70 all the way through to, you know, glam and then disco and punk and everything that happens culturally and politically as well in Britain, what happens as well. It's like a hell of a, it is like a grand adventure, like a grand Odyssey story. So I kind of, with their initial idea, I kind of pitched it back to them and I said, well, I said I'll be willing to take it on if, as long as you're all right with me, like making each book not just completely television on Bowie, and you know, I can write about other things as well. And you know, the main thing I wanted, I thought, the main thing I thought I could do different, which hadn't been done before, because obviously so many biographies have been written about him. I didn't see the point of writing another big biography, even like a 10-volume one. I thought if I could do something that kind of really put Bowie into context, so you're really seeing, you know, at the start of the decade when he isn't fit, well, he's a one-hit wonder with Space Odyssey, but he's not yet the Bowie that we all know. To put into context what's going on around culturally, to see where he is within that, or why he isn't there yet, and then through the decade, then just sort of like seeing as culture moves on and as he goes almost like on a radar from outside to like to the deep like inside a culture, just seeing how everything moves around him. And you know, some of the stuff in the books isn't even directly to do with him. It's kind of, but this thematic and stylistic stuff that kind of like ties in really. So I basically pitched it back to them and again with my idea of the title was, well, can we do it this, and can we call it, how do we, why don't we call it Bowie Odyssey, blah, 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 every year, and can we make the covers look like Changes One Bowie, like that sort
Yeah,
of thing. That
yeah,
was mine. So I sort of pitched it back to them like that, and then he said, yeah, well, and I said, as long as you don't mind me writing it the way that I write, which is quite stylized and not straight journalistic, then, and as long as you're okay with that. And they said, yeah. So that's really how it came about. And then once I'd started it with the first one, I kind of I didn't really think too much about, okay, I've got to do all of these. I mean, now I'm over halfway. It feels a bit, I'm all right. There came a point maybe about 73 when I was thinking, you know, not even half. But it's quite good, you know, because
yeah,
it is year on year, and so it's like I've got a year to write a book. Um, each one takes about 9 months, so it's like quite intense research for like half of it, and then like pretty intense writing. And obviously, I mean, I had a luxury of time to spend longer on each year. I could probably write a more intense book. So, but what I try and do is kind of like with the time I've got and with the lengths that the books are is put as much into it as I possibly can in that time frame, and then sort of like move on really. So it's just like defining what I do. It's definitely defining my work life has been for the last 6 going on 7 years now. So I kind of, it's something I kind of yeah, it is definitely
yeah.
it is definitely defining. Yes.
I'll tell you what I was reminded of was there's this series of books by a historian named Robert Caro about Lyndon Johnson, and I was reminded of that both because of the commitment of the author to this very long-term project, but also as you were describing, Bowie is a character in this series, but it's really about the world, right? It's really about the 70s. And you know, I'm struck by the, you know, it's not the same story, but I'm struck by the pace of change that is evident from the books. But one thing that you do different than Caro is you've fictionalized the story. Everything is based in history, but these are fictionalized accounts. So why did you choose to take that tact?
Yeah, fiction. I would say dramatized, not fiction.
Okay, 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 okay.
I mean, it is. See, it is fact. It is fact. I mean, obviously,
Yeah,
I have a dramatic license, and you know, as I always say, I might have speeding points on that. But the way, I mean, well, partly it is. Funny enough, when I first started writing, I mean, all the other books I've written before have been in standard third person past tense. So it'd be like, you know, David did, or Bowie was, blah 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 blah.
right.
And as I started writing the first one, 70, it just felt, I mean, obviously, obviously, I started this series in the wake of his death. Um, yeah, but it did feel like, you know, this felt like a bit dead. Doesn't mean like physically him. I just thought it just felt a bit, oh, I don't know really what I'm doing here. And I've never written in present tense before. But then I thought it was an experiment. I thought I tried it. And it sort of then came alive to me really, because I thought, the thing, the thing that kind of struck me, which was unexpected, is that suddenly, David is rather than was staying, and he's alive. So he's alive on the page, and then everything's alive on the page. I realised that what I really try and do is, as much as I can, like almost like a time capsule, time machine, kind of put the reader actually in the year at that time. So, rather than if you're reading about it in past tense, it's like looking at something through like in a museum through a piece of glass, whereas in present tense, you're kind of like you're there and things are happening around you. Um, in terms of kind of the dramatizing, it's really, I mean, it's really to kind of to tell the story really, rather than so. I mean, there've been so many documentary type accounts where, I mean, I do interview people and I do a hell of a lot of research, but rather than sort of present it as a straight, this was said in this newspaper and this person said this, quote unquote, I kind of like, in a way, it's more work, kind of write it the way I do it, because I have to kind of like fuse all that together into kind of like a, it does read like fiction, that
Yeah.
which is the deliberate intent.
Yeah.
Um, but just to give it, just to tell another story, I think as well, the thing that I try to do very, that I'm conscious of in terms of the Bowie-ness of it is not not being boring, and also not being, and trying to be original. It's like, the whole point of Bowie was that, for me anyway, I mean, beyond the music, what I've always appreciated about him much was that what a total artist he was, and how he never kind of repeated himself, and didn't want to just like do the same old thing, and always to try and do famously creative things, often upsetting his label, and pockets of his audience at the same time. So I thought, so for me, writing them in that way, I'm sort of trying to be true to the spirit of Bowie creativity, at least in terms of giving people a, rather than just another journalistic or academic account, or slightly dusty account, maybe, give them something that feels like vivid and alive, and just different, really. I mean, obviously, not everyone's going to like what I do, but at least it's unique.
Yeah. I'll tell you, when reading the most recent volume, 74, it resonated with me in a different way than the earlier ones. And I realized why. I'm 56, and
Okay.
74 is really the earliest time that I have even fuzzy memories.
Okay.
And the world where Jimmy Osmond and Evil Knievel were things
Yeah,
suddenly
yeah.
like woke up, right? But
They were
ironically,
things.
maybe, yeah. I mean, it's like, when was the last? I mean, not asking you, asking in the general sense. When was the last time you thought about little Jimmy Osmond? But at the time, right? I mean, when I was 5, that's something that I did think about. So there was kind of an irony, because it seems like the Bowie character, as my consciousness was waking up, his consciousness was sort of closing down. And I, having read the book and knowing about Bowie, I know what happened. But what happened? Like, the Bowie that Dick Cavett interviewed in 1974 was
Yeah.
very different than the Bowie that Russell Hardy interviewed in 1973.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, in one word, drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Again, what I like doing by that doing these books is that someone once asked me early on what I'm learning about Bowie while writing these, and in a way, although I am learning stuff, learning a lot of facts, learning information, and different things, he's almost like a different character in each book, because
Yeah.
he changes, not just in terms of you know, I mean, how old is he in the first book? He's what, 23 in the first book. So, and not only in terms of like getting old, but fame changes people.
Mm.
Obviously, his marriage to Angie and becoming a father changes him. Um, chemically, he changes. Through, it's no, I'm not being any way disrespectful, that to say that everybody knows that Bowie was one of the most uh, voracious cocaine addicts of the 70s music scene, as was Elton John, as was so many other people, Fleetwood Mac, etc., all around. Um, but cocaine really does change his. I mean, well, I mean, we're talking about addiction, really, obviously. And the thing about addicts is that, I think addiction needs all our sympathy and understanding. It's an illness, not a choice. Um, and these all our empathy, and I think we're much wiser about addiction now than we were in the 70s. But it doesn't change the fact that addicts themselves are, you know, by the very nature of addiction, you know, the most selfish individuals you can ever meet, like on the planet. So in terms of how he changed, I think there came a point. I think the cocaine comes into the story at the end, towards the end of '73, and
Yeah.
I try to do it with like humor at first, but there comes a point, certainly in a book that's coming out '75, when it just doesn't become funny anymore. Because he generally, even though incredibly, I don't know whether in spite of or because of, he makes some of his greatest music he's ever made during those years. But as a person, you probably wouldn't want to be that well stuck in a lift with him.
Yeah. No, it struck me. I actually read them in reverse order. But it struck me
Others
that,
have, yeah.
yeah, the point in the 73 book, you actually
Mm.
write in each word is its own sentence. It period has period started, period.
Yeah,
Right.
it's
And
stuck down.
what's striking though is how late that incident occurs in the book. And then by the 74 book, he's a different person, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
cocaine is a character, like a central character in the book.
it
But
is really. Yeah.
yeah, but you don't ever mention, you don't use the word, right? You say it's the elephant or it, right? Why don't you use the word?
Well, I try not to. Well, I've had. I mean, I ran out of euphemisms, so it does turn up in '75.
Okay.
It's partly because cocaine is such a. There's a lot of nonsense and a lot of fake glamour around cocaine, and even as much as people condemn it, often in the music press or music journalism talks about cocaine and rock, like kind of like cocaine and rock, that kind of
Yeah.
like it's a cool thing, and it's a bloody awful drug. So I thought I'm not gonna I'm not gonna give you know I'm not gonna actually, I'm just not gonna name it because everyone knows what it is anyway, and trying to have fun with not naming it and coming up with all these things. But that's '74. I kind of can't quite remember. That's the other thing about doing these books, right? It's because I'm always doing one a year ahead. Like someone asked me about the one I wrote 2 years ago, and I'm a bit, oh, what did I
Yeah.
write? But yeah, so I don't mention it. I mean, it's very, very obvious to the reader what's going on. But it's kind of just I thought to make it amusing, I would think of a lot of metaphors and euphemisms. Which I do keep going in the '75 book, but there comes a point when it's just sort of things start getting quite dark in '74. But '75, it's kind of like the peak or depth of his addiction, because obviously he's in LA, he's not touring, he's not even recording, he's kind of like in limbo waiting to make the man who fell to earth, and that's when he's pretty much at his absolute worst in terms of all the mythology of the things he may have done or may have seen. Did he really did he really keep his urine in the fridge? Did he really see a devil in a swimming pool? It's all kind of like very mythologized. So there's a bit of print the legend in the next one, because of all that, because there's no other way to write about that in it. No one's going to kind of authenticate what did or didn't happen. And in a way, yeah, some of those outrageous stories, like the famous keeping his urine in the fridge because he was scared that witches were going to use his bodily fluids for spells and stuff. Whether that's true. I mean, the books he was reading would indicate that that could possibly be true. And even if that story isn't actually true, it's kind of like almost like the lie that tells the truth. In terms of, like,
Yeah.
sometimes these myths about rock stars, whether like that biting the head off the chicken or whatever, whether that did or didn't happen, it kind of like that they kind of say something about the person that adds to their sort of legend, really. So
Yeah. So, if cocaine is a character, you have other like human characters, and I it strikes me that in some of the earlier books, several of the characters are very directly connected to Bowie, and then by '74, you have David Essex and David Cassidy, who
yeah.
are very tangentially connected to Bowie, but they're major characters in the book. And like, what are you doing with that? Why are they why are they essential to this story?
Wireless. Well, okay, okay, good question. I'll tell you. Well, in terms of David Essex, I don't know. I don't know how is David Essex well known in America. I'm not
Not at
sure.
all.
No, I
Nope.
wouldn't. I
And
wouldn't thought he
and the
would be.
movie Stardust, which you write
Oh
about.
well, exactly. Well, the
Yeah.
reason he's in '74 is because in '74, David Essex is making a film called Stardust, which comes out at the end of '74, and the story of Stardust is a story of a rock star who comes up through the '60s, becomes huge, and then gets into drugs and becomes a very isolated person. And I won't say the end, just in case anyone's never seen Stardust, because has a dramatic ending. So the character that David Essex plays in the film Stardust, Jim McClane, is basically just like Bowie. It's basically sort of Bowie's stories spelled out. And David Essex said he absolutely hated although he liked the work, he really struggled and suffered mentally making that film because the character was so not him. David Essex was he was a very stable. He had a wife and kid. He wasn't like had a very secure background. He was doing none of the stuff that Bowie was doing. So that story is in the '74 book as a kind of as like a thematic tie-in really
Yeah.
with what's happening to Bowie. With David Cassidy, well, they do meet. David Cassidy did want to work with Bowie, and Bowie at one point was thinking, maybe I could produce some David Cassidy, or maybe this is at a point when Bowie did not yet have a huge hit in America, just before Fame. So, thinking if I wrote a song for David Cassidy, and maybe that could be my first kind of like big radio chart hit in America. But also as well, I think what links those three is a lot of the books are written, a lot of the early books. Um, there's a lot of focus on the what would be called like the teeny bopper, screamager, weenie bopper, whatever you want to call it, market, which often gets I think overlooked in any discussion of Bowie. Is that he became the biggest selling album artist, I think 73, 74, absolutely huge, star in Britain. And the people buying those records, I'm sure a lot of older people did, and students and all the rest of it. But a lot of that mass was young teenagers, the same kind of teenagers who would have been buying David Cassidy, David Essex. But similar sort of audience. So the pop magazines at the time, like Jackie and Mirabelle, like the kind of like the UK girls magazines, they would have, David Cassidy on the cover one week and then Bowie was on the cover the next. Or David,
Yeah.
so they were all in the same. I mean, Bowie, Mirabelle magazine even had they used to do these all this fan magazines. I'm sure Tiger Beat did the same. They'd have like columns from the artists every week, like so and so writes, and for about year 18 months there was a Bowie My World column in Mirabelle magazine, which was obviously he didn't write a word of it. It was Cherry Vanilla, his press officer, who wrote it. But there are a lot of facts in that about what he's up to, which are actually true. But obviously they're written in a very kind of like talking to teenagers sort of language. So he's part of that. They're all part of the same, they're all contemporaries really, which and the contrast and compare is really what happens to all of them, and of those three, obviously Bowie survives, has a fantastic career. David Essex has a successful career doing what he chooses. The tragedy amongst the three is David Cassidy, really, who having been like a prisoner of Keith Partridge for all those years,
Yeah.
and then when he finally tries to get free, well, there are a lot of things, reasons why, but and then he too ends up, becoming I think he coke was his thing as well. He became a alcoholic, drug addict as well. So it's kind of like these three Davids, very different characters, but all in the same sort of like teenage pop orbit of the '70s, and just sort of like contrasting and comparing, like where they are and what's happening to them, and so that's why I kind of like uh threaded those three together
Yeah.
in that.
Something that struck me is, and I took from that treatment of those three was that you're writing from the perspective of today, and
Mhm.
you just were talking about what happened to their careers, but also their legacies. Bowie right
Yeah,
now is probably has never been more appreciated as an artist and a cultural
sure.
force.
Yeah.
where, and no disrespect to the memory of David Cassidy, but he's just not remembered that way. And there's another figure that is more prominent in the earlier books and is sort of makes a guest appearance in the 74 is Mark Bolan.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
he's a huge character. Um, I mean, yeah. Obviously, I'm writing these books in here and that, but I mean, one thing I try and do is kind of throw. It's very hard to sometimes. It's obviously it's to throw everything we know out of my head. But that the way the books are written, I never refer to anything that's coming. The books all exist exactly in their time, so there's no sort of like P.S. Reader. I'm afraid David Cassidy met a tragic
yeah,
end and became an alcoholic. Yeah, I might do little like hints or whatever, or little things, but I kind of very much lock it in its own time. Oh, Bolan's a huge character. I mean, he actually isn't in 75, which I've actually there was a Bolan chapter that I wrote, but it kind of slowed the story down, so I ended up having to edit it out. But he's a really huge character. He's kind of like he's sort of almost like a well, he is like a rival to start off with, and
yeah,
then they become a four. But then they end up, but then it's kind of as the seesaw goes up and down. As Bolan becomes huge first, Bowie's insanely
yeah,
jealous. And then when Bowie starts to get big, then Bolan can't handle it. And then of course, the higher Bowie's star rises, Bolan's into kind of in contrast starts to fall. But they become very close towards the end. And obviously, in a few books' time, 1977, there will be the death of Bolan, and which did affect Bowie quite profoundly. Because in a way, they're so similar. They're both born in 47. They're both London mods. Um, the two of them, I mean, in terms of glam rock in Britain, I mean, Mark Bolan did initiate it. Forever, what everyone thinks about, Ziggy and Bowie being a figurehead for glam, Bolan was there first. And in fact, the earliest use of the phrase glam rock that I could ever find in the music press was in June of 1972, and it was a New Musical Express gig guide, and it was a photo of Bolan and a photo of Bowie, and it just said glam rock. So the
yeah,
first, so they kind of like christened it. And I think that, so it's the obvious sort of parallel with Bolan started it, Bowie run with it, a little bit tortoise in the hare in a way, because Bowie obviously went further, and also Bowie was the um changes music so much more than Bolan did. Bolan was much more of a kind of born rock and roller, and I think as
yeah,
well that's a big difference. Is that I think for Bolan, rock and roll was an absolute calling. But Bowie, it was something like Bowie has always said that he was an actor and he tried different things. So I think for Bowie, rock and roll was a performance that he was fantastic at, which he did for a few years, but it wasn't naturally him. There was other artistic things he
yeah.
had done.
Well, something that really jumped out is you're talking about Bolan as this huge figure, and he was a
Yeah.
huge figure just in terms of your books and the earlier
Mhm.
books, and then by the last one that I read, I don't have 75 yet,
Yeah.
but there's almost like a brief encounter with Mark Bolan. He seems, and again, no disrespect to his memory, but in that encounter, he seems pathetic and sort of stuck in the
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh,
yeah.
yes. I mean, I love him, but he had his
Yeah,
protective moments. Yeah. Yeah,
and
but
Bowie, just to another observation is in this book, which this is the Diamond Dogs year. It's like
yeah,
Bowie is already tired of Diamond Dogs, and it's more about the preamble of Young Americans,
yeah,
which
yeah.
I thought was like this is showing that he's constantly changing, whereas Mark Bolan was sort of stuck in a moment in time. Is that what you're trying to show?
Yeah, absolutely. That's completely as it was. I mean, Bowie did yeah. Well, I think it's not just. I think very famously he sort of he ties his stuff and moves on. I mean, Hunky Dory is a good example. He makes Hunky Dory. Hunky Dory comes out, I think, late the week before Christmas, 1971, and then about 6 weeks later, or at least within 2 months, there he is on stage dressed all in his Ziggy stuff, doing Ziggy Stardust, and rather than being out in the road promoting Hunky Dory, he's already on to the next thing. And I think with Diamond Dogs was the same. He kind of he recorded it in this kind of like the bleak winter, spring of actually no, it was January, February. He finished it, I think, in March '74, and then he moves to America, and then he's working on the stage design of the stage show. But by the time it ever comes to it, he's almost bored with it because he's already thinking, he's already looking around, he's already excited about Philadelphia soul and stuff, and so he's he had such a fast creative mind. He was always kind of one step ahead, and sometimes got a little bit bored with what he had to do, like his obligation to see that one through. But Bolan, I mean, yeah, Bolan wasn't in a great place in '74, nor in '75. He went through his own kind of like cocaine and alcohol kind of madness.
Yeah.
But which yeah, so but I mean, for me, I mean, maybe it's probably maybe different from a American perspective, but in Britain, I mean, until '73, certainly, I mean, in '72, even though even the year of Ziggy Stardust, Mark Bolan was the biggest pop star. He was absolutely enormous. He so and going through it chronologically as I do, and doing kind of like year by year and month by month, having to read all the music press and all the popular press and that, you can really see in very slow motion the kind of chronology of the passing of the baton, where Bolan absolutely peaks, and then Bowie comes along and kind of like picks it up.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, do you get a sense that Bowie was doing this, plotting it out deliberately? He sometimes comes off as this very instinctual character rather than a plotting or scheming or planning character.
Uh, Instinctual. Yeah, I think he probably was. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah. What? How do you mean?
Well, like he sees a band and he likes the sound and he decides that's what he wants to do, rather
Oh,
than
yeah,
there's a line actually near one of the last lines in the last book. I wrote it down, so I'm gonna look at it. Here he is plotting 50 years ahead of the odd misshapen world outside his window, an artist unshackled. So I pulled that quote because, first of all, you're writing the book 50 years later, right? So it's like the world 50 years later,
I'm
but
hinting.
also how much it's the idea that Bowie was plotting seemed to contrast this sort of zombie-like figure that was just sort of lurching towards urges. Like he liked the Sigma sound, so he goes to Philadelphia to
Yeah,
find
yeah, yeah.
it, right? Like there's certainly no plan for what he would do 2 years after that, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that's just me being romantic and dramatic, John, saying the word plotting like that. I think just in that instance, trying to say, I was just sort of like, because I think that's the last scene that we see him in '74, and obviously he is using, but also at the same time, he's free to do what he wants, and yeah. I mean, that's I suppose that's an example of me slightly nudging the reader, going, but we know what he's going to do next.
Yeah.
Um, but I think no, I think you're completely right. It was absolutely instinctual. I think he'd see a band, see things, and straight away, and he'd be, you know, and fearless about it as well. Not just, oh, I wonder if I could do that. It's like, I'll do that. I'll have one of those. He was very much with a lot of things. Like as you say, in '72 he sees the New York Dolls and thinks, yeah, I'll take a bit of that vibe. In early '74 he sees the Three Degrees and Barry White and thinks, yeah, I'll have a bit of that. He's um I think he's always like that.
Yeah. You mentioned the Three Degrees, which was a band that I had either forgotten or never knew about. And I took from your treatment of his admiration for them that was the seed that led to Young Americans. But
It was. Yeah,
it was okay because a lot
thanks.
of people today might dispute that. So how did you reach that conclusion?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. Well, there's a lot been written about Young Americans, and some books say that he got the idea by being taken to the Apollo Theater, and which he did go to the Apollo and that, but the Apollo at that point, it was very much old school sort of Motown acts and sort of like all coordinated dance moves and that. It wasn't really kind of like if he wanted to make that sort of stuff, then why didn't he go to Detroit? You know what I mean? It's like it's
Yeah.
specifically Philadelphia. I think a lot of people, basically, a lot of people when they look at young Americans, look for a seed of it, they think, oh well, Bowie, where's his interest in soul music? No, he always loved soul music. He was a mod, so he always loved soul music. You know, even as a teenager, you know, James Brown, like the Paul, was one of his favorite albums. He's always on record talking about that, and saw James Brown live. Um, you know, I think in the late '60s, early '70s, sometimes. So, you know, he's, you know, obviously a lot of soul records. Um, Growing up with that he liked. But young Americans, he specifically wanted to go to Philadelphia. He specifically wanted to work at Sigma, and what the big Philadelphia records around that time. Um, you know, well, the first ones that he would have encountered face to face would have been the Three Degrees, who were not yet big in Britain when he saw them. He first saw them in Amsterdam, and then he did see them when he came over to London. And he was asking them about you know, records, you know, where they record and stuff. At that first meet, he first properly meets them at the Three Degrees. They come over for a showcase in at a London hotel in the Mayfair, and he goes to meet them. When he meets them as well, also there was a producer who maybe Americans don't know the name. It causes quite a strong reaction in Britain. Pete Waterman, who's a young DJ from Coventry on his way. He ends up becoming like one of the biggest sort of like producers, hit makers in the 80s. He was behind people like Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan and people like that. He was sort of like almost like a Simon Cowell-ish figure of of the 80s, if that's fair or unfair. Probably unfair to him. But anyway, yeah. But before he was the Pete Waterman, when he was like an up and coming DJ, he was a huge fan of a huge soul fan as well. And he was at this showcase for the Three Degrees, and he saw Bowie there, and he's like, "Go, Bowie, what are you doing here?" Because you know the last person he would have expected to see at a Three Degrees showcase would have been Bowie. And he said, "Oh no," he said, "Well, I'm off to America," and he said to him then, and this would have been March 1974. He said, "I'm going to make a solo album with black musicians." So you know that's as early as Bowie was thinking of it, and it was, you know, and then when he's in America, I think, you know, the um the sound of Philadelphia, that the Soul Train theme, that becomes number one, and that suddenly becomes a huge thing. So I think he was absolutely in sync with specifically what Sigma were doing. You know, I mean, I'm sure other people have their theories, or people who around them have their memories of where the idea came from, but you know, you have to ask, why did he want to go to Sigma? Why was it Philadelphia? You know,
Yeah.
you know, why wasn't it Muscle Shoals? Why didn't he go to, you know, you know, and you know, the thing that I look for with because a lot of these things I do these books, it's not so much kind of like sometimes you can go into things with like preconceived ideas, you know, and what I try and do is kind of like forget everything and
Yeah.
kind of and just look at what I find and on the evidence that I find and the chronology that I'm doing, and that was an example of that. I thought, you know, I didn't really realize it before, but that must have been the point when he thought, you know, Sigma Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's my theory, and I'm sticking to it, readers.
Yeah.
But
No.
but
Oh,
I'm
that's
saying I think the Three Degrees have a lot to answer for.
so we mentioned the Three Degrees. We mentioned Bolan. You know, there's these other figures, Mick Jagger, John Lennon, that
Yeah,
Bowie admired, but he also worked with excellent musicians that he seemed to have less respect for, almost like if they were willing to work with him. You know, there's a line in the '74 book about their drones on an assembly line. Um,
yes.
you know, and there's a conflict with Mick Ronson. What's going on there? Why is he sort of nasty to people he's working with?
I think he learned a lot from the whole Spires experience, and it became complicated because obviously, you know, famously, you know, with the management of Tony DeFries, there was a bit of conquer and divide between, you know, Trevor and Woody kind of got pushed aside because they're asking for more money, and you know, Ronson as well, and you know, then Ronson then becomes his own personality, and I think one thing Bowie learned from that um, was the sort of, well, he wanted, it was important for him now just to be the star on stage. It wasn't about the band anymore. Of course it was about him. Of course he needed a band to kind of make the records, I mean, the way you quote me there, I'm being quite dramatic and a bit harsh, but that's the way to tell them. But I think there was that, he didn't really, he wanted it to be about him. Oh, because
Yeah,
it always was about him, but there was a point at some point, with the Spiders when Ronson, even though he was a great friend of his, the cult of Ronson did get to him, and then other egos in the band perhaps thinking they needed a bit more and stuff. So it became messy really. So
yeah,
it's just I think a way of keeping everyone level. But that said, though, even though there was an element of that, I mean, he was so loyal to the musicians he worked with, who obviously whose work he really appreciated and could trust. Carlos obviously being one, the whole the damn trio.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because if you look at you all got to do is look at the backs of the records. Same characters keep coming up again and again. Same with Visconti as a producer. He kind of got to a point where he kind of got his comfort people around him and knew that whatever he chose to do, they'd go with him. So I think that made it easy.
yeah. Well, it's sort of interesting phenomena. Through this project, I've interviewed some of the people that have appeared in some of these books,
Okay.
like Ava Cherry and Tony Zanata and Earl Slick, and
Okay.
like, oh, you just call him Z. I know who that is. So, but I mentioned that not to name drop, but because a lot of the people that appear in these stories from a fairly long time ago are still around, and I'm wondering if,
Yeah.
yeah, if how they've reacted uh,
Uh,
yeah,
How have they reacted? Oh, I haven't spoken to any of those people you've mentioned. Um, how have people reacted? I mean, I'm sure some people possibly don't react terribly well. Um, but I've also had some decent reactions from some people who I've interviewed and stuff. I mean, I do try and interview people as much as I can. I think you probably get better access, you see, John, because you're a Bowie fan doing a Bowie podcast, and
yes,
I'm a pesky writer who's going to probably say, you know, I'm unauthorized, so I could say anything. I have met Ava; she is lovely. Um, but what I mean, I can't. I don't let these things bother me in terms of, I don't think, oh, I mustn't say that. I wonder what they'll think about
yeah,
that. I just have to tell it as I see it in a way. But I don't really think. I mean, in the same way that I have to kind of be honest, I think, to the story that I'm trying to tell, even in terms of how I portray Bowie. Because I mean, obviously, there's moments when unpleasant moments, and I'm not into hagiography, so I do have to say, when he's obviously out of his mind or maybe not being particularly nice to people, whatever, to sort of like, put it in there. And there may be some squeamish Bowie fans who don't want to read anything sort of bad, who won't like it, but that's fine. That's their
yeah.
choice. But I just kind of have to, I don't. I mean, I don't. I mean, British sense of humor and all that. I don't set out to be awful to anybody. I think, I always think,
No,
yeah, but I think even if I'm taking, I'm having a laugh at somebody. Well, I think I do it with humor.
yeah,
I mean, there is a lot of humor in. I mean, they're very British centric, these books, but there is a lot of humor in them. I don't know how well the jokes travel across the Atlantic, but there is humor in there.
I picked up on that. Let me ask you about one other figure that appears, and I'm struck by Mick Jagger, the
Yeah.
only one in this storyline who is still doing the same thing today, still able to fill stadiums and command attention. And what's his trick? How has Mick Jagger traversed half a century, more than half a century?
Oh, if we all knew Mick Jagger's trick, I think control and consistency, really. I think he's never ever, he'd be the last person to kind of end up, I'm sure, well, he's a very litigious character. I'm sure he's led a very blessed life. But, whatever he's done, good or bad, I don't think he would never go down the Keith route, for example, I think he's always, I mean, before he was a rock star, he went to the London School of Economics.
Yeah,
which is very well known. I think there's in a way it sort of tells you all you need to know about Jagger. He's the kind of the businessman rock star or something. But
Yeah.
he's a great character to write about, and I think again, the interesting thing about Bowie is how he kind of, he famously said in that Russell Harty 1973 interview, "I'm a collector. I collect things. I
Yeah.
collect people." But he did. I mean, he kind of, growing up as a Stones and Beatles fan, first of all, he kind of, and Velvet Underground as well. He kind of becomes friends with Lou Reed. Then he becomes friends. Then he was friends with Jagger. Then he moves on to Lennon. So he's very good at sort of like, um, you know, yeah, collecting the set of kind of childhood heroes and befriending them. But they all kind of, it was reciprocal. I think Lennon, especially, I think he really got on with Lennon well. I think obviously, I think him and Lennon had a creative rapport in the way that I think Jagger, obviously, I know they did later do a duet and all that, but I think him and Jagger were slightly, did have that comic rivalry thing going on as well.
Yeah.
Like as in, Bowie famously stole, inverted commas, the idea for the Guy Pelliot's, the artwork for Diamond Dogs, because he was working on a Stones album at the same time. So Bowie kind of got in there first with Diamond Dogs, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, but that's a whole. I mean, again, we'll never know fully what happened between the Jaggers and the Bowies. That was, I mean, to be a fly on the wall round the either house when the other couple was there visiting in the 70s must have been. Well, that's a book I'd read.
Yeah, I would too. So Simon, you've been so generous with your time, and I feel like I could talk to you all day, but I won't do that to you. So
Carry on. All right.
you're okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna just ask a couple more questions then.
All right. Yeah.
So there's I I feel like I read this in more than one of the books, but I went back to find it and I only found one reference. Is it an inside joke that Bowie keeps saying that his latest album is more like me than anything I've done previously? Because it seems like he says that, and then the next album is totally different.
That is in there somewhere. I don't know. It's not really, I mean, well, it's very interesting to see how he kind of what he says about albums in context at the time, because he revises his opinion all the time. I mean, he's very, very negative on Hunky Dory at one point. He's kind of very dismissive about it. Whereas later on, I think that the complete reversal. I think again that's just a changing character. I mean, he'd say one thing one year the next. I'm not sure about. It's not a deliberate. It's not a deliberate in joke on my part, anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So I mentioned in the beginning that the latest book is Bowie Odyssey 75, and when people are watching,
there it is, readers.
There it is. I have ordered it, Simon. I have not received it yet, so I haven't read it. But
no, thank you. I'm sorry.
Oh, you did? Oh, thank you very much.
I could have. I still can if you want to cancel that order.
Well, my question is this: what should readers anticipate in there, and what's next?
Okay.
What's ahead?
What to expect in 1975? Well, they can expect this. You can see those two people. Obviously, there's Bowie on one side, and that's a woman called Margaret on the other.
Yeah.
They can expect a lot of Margaret. Actually, they can expect a lot of women because 1975 was the International Women's Year. And one of the themes, there's a lot of women in the book. We get to see a lot more of his mother. Angie, obviously, is in there. It's also women from the point of view of victims. There's a few nasty characters in there in terms of British crime that's going on. That kind of again thematically ties into the stuff that's happening with Bowie vaguely that year. You can expect what else? The big change really is musically is the emergence of punk. And I think again, when I was it's not something I realized until I kind of like got to it. But as I was finishing 74, I realized that with the idea to do 10 books, I realized that the first 5 books, 70 to 74, kind of like have a narrative arc together and tell a story. And for me, 74 felt a bit like kind of like the end of part one and a break. And 75 feels like the start of another 5-year cycle. I think vaguely, roughly speaking, the first 5 books are kind of like the rise and fall of glam rock.
Yeah.
And then the next 5 books will be the rise and sort of fall of punk rock, because just as in 70, the sparks for glam start in 70, the starts for punk, British punk anyway, start in 75 with the Sex Pistols. So that's in there. In terms of Bowie, what he's up to, well, if you thought he was bad in 74, the worst is yet to come, but there is just the worst, and after that he bounces back. But importantly, in terms of music, obviously he makes fame at the start of the year, but the big kind of like crescendo really is towards the end of the year. He makes Station to Station, which is sort of seen as kind of like the zenith of his cocaine period. But as an album, probably up there, definitely be in my top 3.
Yeah.
So for there's a lot of turmoil and madness and a lot of witchcraft and talking about fascism and all those things that we know about. All that kind of darkness is in there. But he does make one of the albums of his life at the end of it. So
Yeah.
It also has a very dramatic ending. But don't worry, readers, everything's going to be okay. He lives on for some.
Well, I look forward to it, and I look forward to 76 through 80 too. So I'm going to close with a silly question that I ask everybody, and so forgive me for it being so light. But what is your favorite Bowie song and album?
Song and album? Oh, that's hard. I don't think it's static.
Yeah.
I'm surprised if people, in a way, it's easy for me to talk about what aren't my favorite. But sometimes it's my favorites are definitely not Hunky Dory, and definitely not Heroes. I'd say they're my 2 least favorite albums he made in the 70s. Although I like them, I would never put them in my top 5. Album wise, I've always gravitated towards Diamond Dogs, Station to Station, Low. I think my kind of top album would be like a revolving carousel of those 3, probably. Then again, I think I do love a lot. I mean, yeah, it's a song. I don't have a specific song, although I do. Well, this is a strange. I think, well, in terms of his vocal, there's one thing about Bowie. I think I'm not maybe not for fans like us, but for a lot of people, I think so much is written about Bowie's visual style and how he changed himself and his imagery and his creativity and all the rest of it. I think sometimes people can forget just what a powerful singer he was, and what an absolutely incredible voice he had. So for me, and it does happen to be a song I write about in the new book coming out. I'm not just saying it for that reason. Even though he didn't write it, I think as a record and as a kind of like as a document of his voice, I think "Wild as the Wind" is quite hard to beat. I certainly can't think of a. I mean, I'm sure there are vocal performances as good, but I struggle to think of a better Bowie vocal than that, really. So "Wild as the Wind," the song. And my favorite album today would be. Oh, let's keep it Station to Station. Let's keep it simple.
Okay.
That album, that song. So I'm there. And, that's my year, 75, end of 75, 76 at the minute.
Well, beautiful. Simon Goddard, this has been terrific. I'd love to have you back when 76 is in the works or comes out. And like I said, I feel like I could talk to you all day. As you said it, I am a fan. And as such, I'd like to thank you for what you're doing. I've really enjoyed the books, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. So thank you.
Thank you very much, John. It's been great. Thank you.